All right, Christine, help me out here a little bit because I am struggling when I talk to people right now because everyone is going batshit out of their minds because we've got the most important election ever happening in about 5 days.
Yep.
It'll be over by the time this airs. So everybody will be like, "Well, we know who won," but right now we don't. Everybody's out of their minds. God knows my phone won't stop ringing with all these damn political whatever people just constantly calling me. So I'm ready to just take a hammer to this thing. It's a crazy time, and it's also the end of the year. People in their professional careers are trying to wrap things up, sales, business performance, whatever. Then you got the holidays on top of it. It's just a crazy time.
Yeah,
What
it is.
advice are you giving to people when you're working with them on their money and focusing them amidst all of this chaos that is around us?
Yeah, it is so easy if you're on social media for 5 minutes to get sucked into that vortex of despair and
It's a
worry and
good word.
anxiety of like, what is happening to the world? What is happening to the country? What is happening to the economy? Here's the thing that I tell people: you cannot control the national economy, but you can control your personal economy.
Oof. Mike, I can't drop this mic, but if I could, mic drop. Like, that's it. I love that.
Yeah, and I've been around a while. I turned 50 in December of last year,
Don't give
and
you a
so
day over
I
40.
well, thank you. I have been through a lot of election cycles. I have been through a lot of ups and downs in the economy, and here's what I will tell you. I have suffered financially under both parties. I have thrived financially under both parties. And 98% of it had to do with my personal actions with my money.
I love it. I love it. We put so many times, I think, so much faith in these political candidates. And yet at the same time, you will look at the polls and everybody will say, well, I don't trust politicians. And it's like, okay, well, which one is it?
Right.
Because obviously, yes, the president has a certain level of power. Your senators and governors have a certain level of power that will impact your life through their method of taxing, whether or not we're
Right.
going to war and money being spent there, all these other things. Yes, they will have an impact over your life. I'm not trying to say they won't. But the thing that's going
Right.
to have way more of an impact on your life is, are you paying attention to the things you can directly control? And I don't know about you. I would love to hear your opinion on this. I feel like the answer is a resounding no with the people I meet. And it really doesn't have to do, I talk about financial stress a lot because I tell people, I'm like, financial stress isn't just about being broke, right? I work with people in my mastermind all the time that have net worths of millions of dollars. They have
Yeah.
lots of financial stress. So
Yeah.
financial stress is not necessarily about how much money is in your bank account. It's about the level of control that you have over it. So like,
Yeah.
what are you telling people when you're like, focus on your personal economy? What's the functional advice where you're like, for somebody who's totally, not controlling anything, where do they start?
So the first thing that I do with all my clients is we get them signed up for a personal finance app
Okay.
because my clients, they make a lot of money. They're multiple six-figure earners. Their finances are complex. They're using multiple payment methods, right? Their
Mm-hmm.
stuff is coming out of their bank accounts. They got a couple of credit cards. Their spouse has a couple credit cards. They've
Yep.
got multiple bank accounts. They're using Venmo. They're using PayPal. How the hell do you know what you're spending? If it's all spread out on like 12 different payment methods. The best
What?
way to do that is to have an app where you connect all those accounts once, it pulls all your transactions in, it uses AI to learn
Mm-hmm.
from you. So it already knows that Starbucks is coffee shops and it knows that Chipotle
Right.
is eating out, right? Uber Eats, like it already knows what those are and it will help you to classify everything so you can see exactly where your money is going. Because a lot of my clients come to me and they say, I want to get my debt paid off. I want to save and invest more. You can't do that if you don't know where your money's going. If you don't have control over your spending, that is the very first step. And I don't care if you're making 50,000, 500,000, or $5 million. You have to know where your money's going.
Let me ask you this. I bring this up a lot. What just to play devil's advocate here a little bit or not. Hey, yeah, Christine, I have a bunch of credit cards, right? But one's getting me miles points and the other one's getting me some cash back deals, and I get like 5% on gas on this month and all these other things. So it's like, I've got a pretty good I'm not an idiot, I have a pretty good reason why I signed up for all these things. Why is complexity in my personal financial system a bad thing?
Bad thing if you're in control of it. So, I have multiple credit cards. I have 3 credit cards. My husband has a credit card, and there's a reason why, because we're getting cash back. We're getting, I get cash off to fly back and forth to Florida to visit my dad, which I do a bunch in the winter. However, I know exactly what's going on those cards. So I think that's the difference is, are you intentional about what's going on in your finances?
Is there a strategy behind all of it?
Yeah. It's super easy to add things, to add a different account and to do this and to do that. But, sometimes we actually have to look at our finances and say, do I really need all these bank accounts? Do I really need all these credit cards? What purpose are they serving? And if they are all serving a particular function and, you're using it, then that's fine. Mm-hmm. It's just that it's kind of the same thing for your possessions and the stuff that you own. It's real easy for that stuff to just take over your entire life, and every single closet you open, there's crap falling out of it.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
You don't even know you have.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I spoke to somebody literally yesterday, and we were going over their net worth. They really had no idea what it was. And they were really surprised, when they came back after doing the exercise I sent them. And they were really surprised at what the number was in a good way. It was a lot higher. And they said, I had 5 different 401k and IRAs, from previous jobs. And I never really paid attention to them because I knew it only has like 12,000, only has like 20,000. Like, okay, it doesn't seem like a lot. But then over a 20-year career, you go back and you add them all up. And he's like, man, I had 150,000 sitting in retirement accounts. And one of them, when it moved over from the 401k to the IRA, wasn't even vested. So he had 4 years of not even getting market returns, and he didn't even know it. So it's like, complexity, not necessarily a bad thing if you are in control of it. But guess what? The point of complexity is that it is by nature harder to control. So if you can simplify it, consolidate all those IRAs into one account, or at the very minimum, like you said, get one of these single sign-on platforms. I use Monarch Money. Which one do you like?
I use Monarch for myself and all my clients.
Mint was my go-to. RIP Mint. But I went to Monarch after that.
It's good. That on LinkedIn,
it was a big thing.
Well, I had used it for 2 or 3 years with my clients because I had used something else previously that was like a startup. And when they crashed and said, we're shutting this down. And I was like, I'm picking Mint because it's been there forever and it's not going anywhere. So I'm sorry I said that. It was my fault.
I have never, I mean, you can make the argument for Twitter, I guess, as far as brand destruction goes, that was a big one. But Elon, I think when he bought that, always knew that was going to happen. He wanted the brand destruction on purpose because of, from what he said, he's like, listen, if I would have kept the brand Twitter, no matter what changes I made, everybody would have seen it as like a censorship tool. And for him, he wanted a clean start and was like, that's exactly why I bought it. And he didn't care about the money. So I think there was a level of intentionality to that. But I would say outside of that, one of the biggest examples of brand destruction I have seen where I don't think they wanted to was Mint. And killing that to, what did it become again? I don't even remember.
They merged it with Credit Karma.
That was it. What a terrible idea. First off, the interface sucks.
Yeah, I didn't, I didn't even go there. I did a very surface,
Oh, I did
um,
just to see what it was. It was
I
bad.
did a very surface review of it, but you couldn't set like budget category limits. It would
None.
give you historical data, but you couldn't do any planning. And now that I use Monarch, I like it even better because you
Yeah.
can plan, like a year in advance if you want to.
Right.
And I think it's a much more robust tool, and I don't mind paying for it. So when my
Not at
clients are
all.
working with me, I pay for their Monarch until
Oh,
they
that's great.
graduate out. And
Okay.
by the time they graduate out, they know how to use it. They're super comfortable with it. They're using it in between our
It
sessions.
works out to be
So
like what, $8 a month or something like that.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not a big expense, and I tell people all the time, I'm like, literally the second that I like got all my accounts hooked up, I said it paid for itself because it found a recurring bill. It's like I have $16,000 of expenses every month. Okay, like I'm not sitting here worried about $12 recurring expenses. I mean, I try to be mindful of it, but
right.
some things slip through the cracks when you have that level of finances going on. So I was like,
Yeah,
it found this $12 expense that was a trial thing my wife had signed up for, and then she thought she canceled it. Apparently it didn't take,
yep.
like they're very good at doing sometimes.
Oh yeah,
And I was like, oh, so I canceled that, saved $144 a year. And it was like, well, it paid itself off literally within the first 3 minutes of me setting up the account. Okay, great. So I totally agree with you. I think you have to have a tool that, regardless of how much money you have, but especially with the more money you have, to be able to track this stuff on a daily basis. So,
yeah. But I thought it was very interesting that you said the client you were working with didn't know what their net worth is. And in the back of my head, I said to myself, but I bet they knew what their credit score was.
I didn't ask him, but that actually would be a really good question. Yeah, probably had a pretty good
But I
idea.
find it very interesting. It was like, you take Mint, that is was a budgeting tool to help you stay on top of your money, and then you merge it with Credit Karma, and you and I both know, your credit score is not unimportant, but your
Right.
credit score it should be called your debt score because
I'd be up for
it
that
basically
rebrand.
is your report card for how nicely you play with debt.
That's it.
And it's so funny because some people, I've told some people, I said, my credit score has never been in the 800s.
Mhm.
And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, it's because I have no mortgage.
Oh, yeah.
All I
That
have is a couple of credit cards, and if I don't have diversity of credit, I can
that's
never
right.
get to 800. But you know what? My net worth is close to $5 million. So
But
what
that
the hell
doesn't
do I
matter.
care?
That doesn't matter, Christine, if you don't have a good credit score.
Well, if I
How
have
are
a
you
good
ever going to
credit
get a
score,
good loan? Who cares if you have 5 million? No,
well,
it's the
they didn't
truth.
care at the Alfa Romeo dealership when I bought my Giulia and wrote him a check. So
It's the back. Honestly, it's one of the greatest arguments for some of the cryptos coming up, because it's like, to go and get a loan, they look at such arbitrary. Your debt to income ratio is one of the first things that they look at. Credit score is going to be very highly ranked right next to it. And if they're
yeah,
looking at you going, you're lower 700s, I mean, we might get you better. And you're like, guys, I could technically pay this off in cash right now if I wanted to. I just
yeah,
don't, because I value the time value of money, and I'd rather just take out like it's a stupid conversation to be had. So that's why
yeah,
there's a lot of disruption in crypto potential for this, because it doesn't care. It's like, oh yeah, you have capital to put up. Okay, cool. Just switch it through this token, instant transactions, boom, you're approved. Like,
yeah,
you know, it's going to be interesting. But I'm with you. People put way too much. It's the cause of this is broke people talking to broke people for financial advice. I really think
yeah.
that's the crux of all of this. It's like, why else would
Part of
you
it.
put so much of an onus on your credit score?
Well, that is part of it. The other part of it is that debt is very actively marketed to us as a society.
Mm,
So,
good point.
in one of my workshops, I give people a homework assignment. I say, watch a 1 hour traditional TV program and do not fast forward through the commercials.
Okay.
Count how many times you are marketed debt in some form or fashion, whether it is a credit card commercial, whether it is a car commercial that's offering financing. Anytime they talk about debt or financing,
That's a
count it.
really good point. I didn't think about that.
So here's what
0% financing on your brand new Ford truck.
Exactly.
That's a really good point.
Like pay your mattress off over 4 years.
Oh gosh, I didn't even think about that. Wow, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's because it's like the air that we're breathing. Like if you go to buy a puppy at PetSmart, they ask you, do you want to apply for the PetSmart credit card and get 20% off your puppy food, right? And all your puppy pads.
It's so true. It is so true.
The last time I did that experiment, it was 16 commercials in 60 minutes.
In 60 minutes.
I think yes, over 60 minutes. It was 16 times. So I think it broke out to be about.
Is that like 1 and 2 commercials?
They were basically selling me debt every 3 minutes and 45 seconds.
Wow. I hadn't even thought about it from that perspective of like, because when you said that, my first thought was like, well, yeah, I see the Capital One commercials and, things like that all the time. I didn't even think about the literally anything else that you can do. And it's like, oh yeah, we'll give you financing and as a part of the ad. It's such a great point. So yeah, Joe Rogan, Joe Rogan loves to talk about how I'll listen to his podcast sometimes. And I've heard him mention this multiple times. Clearly he's sore about this and I get it. But he constantly brings up the fact that pharmaceutical companies are running, I think it's something like 70% of the ads on TV. And we're one of 2 developed nations that even allows them to have like a certain, amount of share or whatever. And we wonder why everybody's on some kind of drug. And I became very conscious of that. I never considered the ratio for debt. So now I'm not going to be able to not see it. Thank you very much. But it speaks to culture, and you're absolutely right.
A prescription or debt, right? So,
and you can probably finance that prescription somehow too. So
they want us addicted and in debt. So now you can sing all the jingles for Wegovy and Capital One.
Gosh,
that's in your
I know. Well, it comes to this is a sticking point for me. I want your perspective on this. One thing that I talk about a lot of times, because you're very much on the financial side of things, I shift a little bit more to try to get people to get clarity on their goals so they can eliminate distractions in their life, right? Finances comes into that, very much so. But it's like I'm a lot of times I'm like, listen, I help people get what they want, by eliminating distractions. But the problem is most people don't even know exactly what they want. They might have an idea, but that's not helpful. So the thing that I tell people is I go, you are, kind of going to what we were talking about before. Like, hey, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, guess what? They're not showing up to do your dishes at your house. Okay. You are the hero of your story. This is what I tell people. You are the hero of your story and nobody's coming to save you. And the reason I emphasize to people that they are the hero of their story is because what do we think about when we think about heroes? We think about action. They took action. We have to take action in our lives. Okay, well, that's great. But what does every hero also have outside of like a superpower or whatever the case is? Every hero has an enemy. They have a villain. So who's the villain, in this context in our own lives? I argue that there's 2 of them. And you could argue one is maybe a minion of the other. But I argue that society is the enemy that we have to fight. And then the other one is distraction. And those are the things that are ultimately preventing us from living the life we want. Now, society is not necessarily this evil thing. When people go, okay, Stephen, what is society? I tell them, I'm like, society is the government. Society is advertisers. Society is the parental expectations of your, from your family. It is any external force that is trying to dictate what you should do with your time, energy, money, and attention. That is that society is a machine and it needs those 4 resources in order to thrive. So again, it's not inherently evil. It just doesn't care about the outcome of your life. It just cares about getting your resources. So when I bring up that perspective to people, That's what I want them to see, is that if you don't have a clearly defined plan, objectives for your life that you're trying to get, then society is going to win out. It's really good. It's very good at taking those things from you. So,
Yeah.
how do you see that play out in the average person's life? And do you have advice for people on how to combat society and distraction in their own lives so they can build the one that they want?
Yeah. Well, I love that you help people get clarity on their goals, because that is something that I do as well. Because one of the things I love to say is that money's job is to support your happiness,
I
but
like
it's
that.
your job to know what makes you happy. So
That's a great point.
now, I mean, sometimes we got to try things and trial and error.
Right.
Someone has never like ridden horseback or gone snorkeling. They don't know if that'll make them happy or not. So, there is some experimentation in there, but it's really about intentionality. So,
Yes.
I am not the budget Nazi. When
Mm,
we start to look at people spending, I just start asking them questions and I
mm,
say, okay, I can see that you're spending X amount on private school tuition for your kids. I'm assuming this is something that's really important to you. Yes. Okay, let's talk about that. And as we start looking at the different expenses, and I'll say, well, tell me what this recurring charge for $200 is at X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh, yeah, my sister in law, she wanted me to join this yoga studio. And I'm like, do you like yoga? Like, are you even going? And they're like, no, you know what? I'm not. And I'm like, okay, well, then let's put that on the list of the things that
society, ladies and
we're
gentlemen.
going to get rid of. Yes, exactly.
Yep.
So it really is a matter of helping people to get clarity on those things.
Mhm.
And one of the things I love to do, and you can see hanging behind me, is a vision board.
Oh, I love
So
vision
I love
boards.
for people to really get clear on, and I give them like a big long list of questions like, where do you want to travel? Who do you want to help? What sort of causes do you want to give back
Good.
to? Like, where is your ideal house? Like, what kind of house is it? What does it look like? Is it a tiny house in the country? Is it, a mansion by the beach? Like, what are those things that you want? Like, let's just take the lid off of the limit and
Right.
say, what are all the different things we want to experience as an individual, as a family? Did you always want to go back to school? Did you want to get
Mhm.
certified in something? Like, let's talk about all those things, because once we do that, then we can say, okay, these are the things that are really going to make us happy.
Mhm.
Let's start directing money towards those things so that money's supporting our happiness. And, we're just basically shutting the money faucet off on the things that aren't really important or aren't making us happy.
There's a word that I love to use for exactly what you're asking them to do. You're asking them to build a strategy. It's like we want to know where strategy has four components: destination, starting point, journey, and checkpoints. You are asking them about the destination. What do you want your life to look like? Where do you want to travel? How much money do you want to make? What does the house look like? Okay, let's evaluate where you are right now in relation to that. Okay, now that we've done
Right.
that, we're going to go to the journey. We're going to figure out how do we fill that gap? And then we're going to
Yep.
pick a couple significant milestones along the way to make sure we're tracking for it. So
Yep.
I love everything about what you just said. And I love vision boards because there's that statistic that if you just write down your goals, and this has been confirmed by like 4 or 5 different studies, and I have a hard time believing it still, but it's true. If you
Yeah.
just write down your goals, you're 40% more likely to hit them. Like there
Yeah.
is not a lower level activity that you could do that takes almost zero amount of time to get you a better increased likelihood of achieving your goals. You know what I mean? And it's like, so that's why I tell people, if your goals aren't written down or in some type of form like a vision board or whatever, you're not serious about them. It's just as simple as
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I run a group program called the Wealthy Woman Book Club.
I know. I'm
And
having a hard time getting my application approved for that. I can't figure out
I'm
why.
sorry, denied.
I'm like Gronk in USAA commercials. It's like, I just can't seem to get in. So,
So we just finished reading Secrets of the Millionaire Mind by T. Harv Eker. It's one of
Good
my
book.
favorite money books. I originally read it back in 2019. I had a mentor of mine recommend it. And when I read it, I was underlining things, I was writing in the book, and there specifically was a spot that said, write down your net worth goal.
Mm,
So at the time I read it, my husband and I had just hit the $1 million net worth mark.
very cool.
So I put my goal as 2.5 million
Okay.
and I put my income as 250,000
Okay.
in 2019.
2019.
When I was reading it with the Wealthy Women Book Club, it's almost double on both counts.
Wow. Okay. Now,
Isn't
now
that
what
crazy?
time
I
what
was
time
like,
frame did you give yourself with that?
I don't even know that there was a time frame. Like it was like there was little journal questions in the book. It just said, "What is your goal?" And
Okay.
I don't know that there was a time frame, but I'm reading this book 5 years later, and not only did I achieve my goal, but I've almost doubled it.
That's incredible. And it speaks to the
Who cares how long that
intentionality.
took?
I need to go read that book again.
Yes, highly recommend it. Well, what's funny is I've got several of the women who are in the Wealthy Women Book Club. Their husbands are reading the books along with them.
Good.
So
Good.
even though the men don't get to participate in the group discussions or in the Facebook group, I think it's awesome because they're also having, the women are having side conversations with their spouses about the stuff that they're learning and they're reading together, which is
Right.
awesome.
That's great. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the differences with the genders in money.
Yeah.
Because we live in a world that just wants to paint everybody and just be like, we're all human. We're all the same. Women can do anything a man can do. Men can do everything a woman. There's no real differences. And I'm sorry, I'm calling bullshit on that right now. There are clear, and granted, I'm not saying that it's we are perfectly the same, or that no man is this and every woman is this. I'm not saying that, but there are clear differences. If you even just look at the data, men tend to take higher risks, right, than women do. Women actually tend to outperform men in their portfolios because they go for more reliable conservative stuff. And men, while we can have outsized returns sometimes because of the risk we take, also have a lot bigger floor because of it. So, I mean, that's just one example. So,
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. If anything, that's why we bring balance to each other in a lot of situations. I want to take risks that a lot of times my wife will ask me some very intelligent questions, and I'll be like, okay. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Maybe I shouldn't do that thing. And sometimes she'll not want to take a risk, and I'll be like, well, but what about these things? And she'll be like, oh, you're right. I need to do that. So it's like we're built to complement each other in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I think that with the gender differences, sometimes it feels like, to me, I'll start off with one and then I want to hear, some of yours. Sometimes I feel like people, it's kind of like cooking. They're like, okay, money is the man's job. And I'm like, no, who made that up? Cooking is the woman's job. Since when did cooking becomes a woman's job? It's like, I know guys that cook really well and women that would burn anything you stuck in the oven. Let's just go. Right. Certain people have natural tendencies to, and honestly, passions, for certain stuff. It's like, I hate cooking. My wife enjoys it. I like money. She hates it. Okay, I'll do the money. Yeah. You do the majority of the cooking. This isn't, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills sometimes it's like, who made this up? So that's something I feel that my wife's mom, she was the money person. My father-in-law, great guy, great cook. Roles totally reversed, right? He doesn't know a thing about money. That's okay. So that's one of the things I see. I see really stupid rules sometimes that we put, on the gender differences. And then I also see things that tend to be true that are just good to be aware of, like risk levels that men are more likely to take and women are less likely to take. And we both need to learn from that. And men should take less risks. Maybe don't go buy that meme coin and put $20,000 on it, guys. And women, hey, maybe you should get into a slightly more aggressive fund, especially if you're young, just something like that. So those are some of the things I see, for you, especially on the women's side. I'm really interested to get your perspective on that, since you're really in that world and you're in those clubs I can't get into.
Yeah, I know. Well, this plays in really well to the book that I just published in August, which is called Provider Money, Pleasure Money. And it talks about the energetics of personal finance. And they're not exclusively male and female. There's both of us have a blend.
Yes.
And, depending on the partner that, we share finances with, sometimes there is one person picks up more of the provider versus the pleasure energy of money. So the way I explain it is it's like the circus trapeze.
Okay.
You need two pieces of equipment in
Sure.
order for it to be successful and fun. You need a swing and you need a safety net. If you have a swing and no safety net, that's freaking terrifying. That's not fun.
True.
If you have a safety net and you have no swing, then you've completely missed the point. So I believe that all of us have to have some level of safety in our finances.
Agreed.
Some people need more or less than others.
Mm-hmm.
If you just think about a single guy who just graduated from college, like he may not need much of a safety net.
Can live out of a cardboard box. He'll be okay.
Right. He'll be fine. He'll eat some ramen noodles. He'll crash on somebody's couch.
I always say without women, there would never be any beautiful buildings or nice houses in the world. Like us guys, we would have really nice cars and we would live in caves. So
you're probably not wrong about that. But then on the flip side, if someone's married and they've got 3 kids, their safety net has to be a lot heftier. Right?
Yes.
And so it's really just a matter of knowing what is your own safety needs and the safety needs of your partner. Some people naturally like doing those things. Like my husband is like so high on the safety. I would say I am more balanced because I came out of a negative relationship. At age 26, I was engaged to a guy who had horrible money habits. And so I experienced life. I like to call it my almost divorce because I almost got married, but I didn't, thank God. And when I exited that relationship, there had been a lot of chaos, both emotionally and financially. And so when I met Nick, the fact that he was so level-headed, he was maxing out his 401k, never had a car
green
payment.
Flags.
I mean, I was just like, oh, you're maxing out your 401k? That's so hot.
Guys, take note.
For me, it was like, oh, like, thank God. And I needed that level of safety, but like he takes it to the nth degree. And he is one of those people that is more of a worrier. And, he'll say, I think we need to shift more of our money into gold. And I'm like, we have plenty of money in gold right now. Like, I think we're going to be fine. But if you want to call our financial planner, you can go ahead and call it. So, and I'm more of the balance. So it's like, once I know what my safety net needs to be, once that's met, I am totally fine with engaging in the pleasure and spending lots of money on that.
That's great.
And having zero guilt over it. But you can't do that if you haven't taken care of the safety net. Right. And I would say in general, one of the things that I really notice with men is that in most of them, there is a hardwired drive to provide.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And if they're not bringing in the money, then there's usually some self-worth that is suffering there.
I would agree. I think you've probably seen this more culturally. I don't know if you'd agree with this. I feel like we've put that on women more culturally But
Yeah.
over the past couple, decades, as, women have become more prominent in the workforce. But I feel
Mhm.
like for men, that's more of a de facto hardwired into us, whether it's, 1,000 years of just evolution of being the provider, baked into us, slash the cultural pressure on top of it of Chris Rock said it really well, the comedian. He said, uh, only women, children, and puppies are loved unconditionally by society, but a man is only as good as what he can provide. And I feel like there's a lot of truth to that, and or at least that's something that guys feel, whether for better or not.
Right.
But that's an interesting perspective, that you bring on that. I do think that's true. And this goes
Yeah.
to another myth. I'm curious what you think about this. I think one of the things in the battle of the sexes that we're seeing right now, I'm calling fake news on this. Okay. Curious what you think. I think that it's total fake news that the majority, not all of them, okay, we're painting with broad strokes here, okay, but I think the majority of men do not care if their girlfriend, wife, whatever, makes more money than them.
Yeah.
I really don't think they care. I think some men, sure, maybe it's a sticking point. I think what matters more to men is, am I able to provide? Can I meet the basic needs? Am I
Mhm.
making money and fulfilled in my career to where if I need to take care of something for her, I can? I think that's what matters more. But that's my opinion. What do you think?
Well, I would say, in the circles that I run in, that is the case. There isn't like, oh, unless there is something where the woman feels resentful, you're not pulling your weight financially,
And
or
that's
they're
very true.
waving it over their head,
Yes.
well, I make more money, I should have more power and control and decision making when it comes to the money.
Now that's
So
that's an
there
interesting
is
dynamic.
that,
Yeah.
power dynamic. But I was having a conversation with one of my guests on the Money is Emotional podcast, Kevin Scott. He is engaged to a coach who makes multiple millions of dollars a year. And, he basically said, my job as a provider is to make sure that all she has to worry about is showing up and being her best self to serve her clients. He said,
Mm,
I do all the grocery shopping. I take care of all of our properties. I deal with all the, high level money conversations. He's like, there's like a dozen different things that I am taking off of her plate, including a lot of the cooking
mm.
and or just making sure that there's food in the house. Um, he said, so that way she can show up and she can be, the star of her coaching business. And the way I am providing for her is by taking care of all of these other things that she doesn't have to worry about.
Love that.
But he said, what helps is that she is extraordinarily appreciative of that,
Yes.
and she puts as much weight on that and the things that I'm doing for her as what she is doing in her business to provide financially.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I
I
think
really
that's
think there's gotta be open conversations in the
yeah,
partnership
because
for
I agree with you, and I have heard that, and this is on both sides, right? Of
sure.
whether it's the man or the woman in the relationship making, especially when there's like a real, um, hey, I got to fly coach unless you help me pay for business class because I can't afford that. Like when
Right.
we're talking like really big disparities in income like that, especially when it comes to a marriage and then you're legally bound to each other, at that
Yeah.
point, that's a really important element because that's where a lot of abuse can creep in. And I'm sure you
Yeah.
have seen people in divorces and things like that, man or woman, to where and that's where I love how you use the word dignity in your brand because
Yeah.
financial abuse in those situations can be such a real thing. Can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about some of the stuff that you see in for some of these people don't even know that they're being abused, right? Like some of these people
Yeah.
look at it and they go, well, they're right. Yeah, they do make the majority of the money. It should be this way. Talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that because I think that's such an important topic.
Yeah, so, I've had clients who have exited emotionally and financially abusive relationships where, they have been their access has been restricted. They
Mm,
haven't been able to, um, really even access the accounts, etcetera, and if you're told, "You're not good with money, just let me handle it. This is too hard for you," you start to
mm,
believe it.
that's true.
And, when this woman came to me, it was like a year or so after her divorce. And, she got a good deal of assets in the divorce because he was a bigwig for one of the major investment companies.
Okay.
He was probably making $500,000 a year. So she exited the marriage with, a good chunk of money that if it was managed properly with her financial advisor, that, she didn't need any any more money from him, but
Mm,
she had so much trauma. Like, she said the first time that she spent over $200 at the grocery store, she had an anxiety attack putting her groceries in the trunk
wow. Oh, that's
because
so sad.
yeah, and it was like, I mean, she literally had to stop herself and was like, "Why? Why is this happening?" And she knew because it was like if she spent over a certain amount at the grocery store, he was gonna call her. Like, I mean, he had
Mm,
something set up, so if she spent over a certain amount, he was getting dinged
he
on
was
her
getting the
phone.
notifications.
Yeah, and he
Okay.
would call her and say, "Why did you just spend $150 at Home Depot? What were you buying there?" And so it's like we had to unpack all of that
Yeah.
and reestablish a sense of safety with her money because she's a smart woman. And, sure, she needed somebody to help her fill in the gaps with her knowledge,
Yeah, we
but
all
it
do.
was really the confidence piece, even
Yeah.
more than the financial knowledge piece.
Well, it goes to your point, right? Money is emotional. I mean, I
Yeah.
I've shifted my perspective over the years. Like I used to say, listen, money's 80% emotional, 20% knowledge. Then I was like, money's like 90%, emotional, 10% knowledge. I'm at this point, money is 100% emotional. I really am. Because and this is how I kind of got there. It's like you I mean, unless you're like Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory and just totally
Yeah.
emotional robot, whatever, kind of thing, unless you're like at that level. For everybody else, it's like there isn't a decision that you can make that involves money that also doesn't involve emotion. Now, the level of emotion you are exhibiting at that point in time, that can have a huge factor. Okay. You don't want to be
Yep.
majorly emotional about something whenever you make a decision. You want to minimize
Yep.
it, but there's no absence of emotion. I came from the sales world. What was one of the first, most basic principles of sales that I was taught? People make logical buying decisions for emotional reasons. That is one of the most
Yeah.
fundamental elements of sales. So
Yeah.
if we know that to be true, it's like, okay, then there is no such thing as an emotionally free, purely logical financial decision. It's just not.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
what are some of the emotions that you see that, let's talk about both ends of the spectrum here. What are one or two emotions that are some of the most detrimental, to people whenever they're going through their finances? And then what are some of the ones that are the most beneficial?
Well, I think, you know, I don't know that I can say a particular emotion is, good or bad because we're human and we're meant to feel all of the emotions.
Very good point.
But the patterns that I see are two things. One is trying to avoid negative feelings by
Mm,
spending money
okay.
because spending money in, I would say, probably 80 to 85% of people feels good.
Okay.
There are a few people that have fear and anxiety around spending, but they're certainly in the minority. Most people, it feels good for me to shop. It feels
Right.
me good for me to go online and, buy a new shirt
Retail
or
therapy.
whatever the case may be, right? The problem is when we are trying to avoid a negative feeling by doing something with money,
Mm.
what happens is we're basically freezing that emotion.
Okay.
It's now stuck in our body because emotion literally means energy in motion. So here's what I tell people. I say, identify what is that emotion? Am I
Okay.
feeling sad? Am I feeling mad? Am I feeling bored? What is it? Am I feeling
Board's a
lonely?
really good one, by the way. That one we don't really consider. So I like that.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah. So once we identify what are those emotions that usually make us overspend, then we can say, what is a good way to express this emotion
Hmm.
without spending money?
Okay.
So if you're sad, watch, let yourself cry. Watch a sad movie, watch The Notebook, something that makes you bawl your eyes out. You
That'll
actually
do
have
it
a
to you.
chemical change. When you cry, your body literally goes through a chemical change
Right.
and you
Yes.
feel better
It's a
after you
release of
cry.
that emotion. Like you said, you're not freezing it
Right.
anymore.
Yeah. And so I would say that's like avoiding feelings.
Okay.
Let yourself feel it. If you're angry, punch a pillow. I see this all the time with women who are going through divorce,
Okay.
right? It's like they're pissed off. And so they go spend money on something that their ex would never let them buy. Revenge
It's almost
spending.
like revenge. Okay.
Yes. And it's like, well, who are you really hurting? Right? If you're
Right.
going into credit
Yeah.
card debt for that,
Yeah, that's true.
like take a kickboxing course, like get all that energy out of your body,
Well, I think you framed my original question in a much better light, right? Because there's actually good and bad to emotions. Like,
Right.
so I think the question I originally framed probably wasn't a good one. And I think you turned it in a much better one. It's like, because I knew this too. It's like shame, for instance. Okay. Shame
Yeah.
sounds like a really bad emotion, on at the front. But then I always talk about the woman and the peacock. And people are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we need shame. If anything, I look around society nowadays and I'm like, we really need to bring back shame in certain
Some of y'all should
areas.
be ashamed of yourself.
It's like some of you really should be, but I always love telling the story of the woman and the peacock. And they're like, okay, what are you talking about? I'm like, okay, this woman, made the national news a couple years ago. Flights went really lax on what they would allow for an emotional support animal on a plane. And this woman brought a peacock as her emotional support animal on a plane. Okay? I'm like, that is the perfect definition of a woman who does not naturally feel any type of self-awareness or shame and has no one in her circle of life who is like, what are you doing? A peacock? Like, what if it like spreads its freaking, like feathers everywhere and then like nobody, like it's hitting people in the face? Like, what? I'm like, this is why we need a certain level of shame. Don't want to get carried away with it, but it has its benefits. Okay. So it's like even an emotion that we see as a negative like that. I love what you said about sadness.
Yeah.
You can't know what true happiness is unless we know what true sadness is too. So it's like we shouldn't be afraid of these. So the releasing of that energy in motion, as you were calling it, is the healthy way to process it. So I absolutely love the way that you phrased that.
Like that you talked about, I call it your emotional volume.
Okay. That's a good.
You should
good way to
never
put it.
make a major financial decision when your emotional volume is high.
Totally
because
agree.
you can't hear the voice of reason. So to me, it's like having two radio stations playing at once. Like the voice of reason is always there. It's like the classical music that you hear in the department store in the elevator. It's, you can almost tune it out because it's so low and constant. And your emotions, they're all over the place. It's like your top 40 radio station where it's like, oh, you've got this soft, sad Ed Sheeran love song. And then the next thing you've got like this booty bumping bass with Beyonce, right? And so it's like, your voice of reason's always here, but your emotions are always like all over the place.
That's a great point. I love the way you frame that.
Tune in and say, is my emotional volume loud right now? Because let me tell you, It can be good emotions. I can be really freaking excited at
Yes.
the car dealership, and my
I've
emotion
earned
can be
this.
way up here,
I did
right?
something.
So it's
Yeah,
like,
I just closed a huge deal. I've worked hard for this. I deserve this.
right. So it's like we want to make sure that emotional volume is low enough so that we can hear both the voice of reason and your emotions, because I think we've all made a decision that logically passed all of the checks, but we had a bad gut feeling about it.
Yeah.
And Lord knows every time I've gone against that gut feeling, it has not worked out well. So
It's
there
true.
is wisdom in those emotions too. So it's not like, oh, we're just throwing the emotions out the window. It's a matter of being the master of your emotions.
Yeah. I think that's so good. We're coming up on time here, and I wish I could Joe Rogan you for just like 2 more hours on this, just do a 3-hour podcast.
My bladder would last that long.
I know, right? So the the thing I want to kind of like wrap up on is, from whether you're in a long-term committed relationship, whether it's a marriage, obviously there's a difference with marriage because there's, legalities that are involved with this.
Yeah.
But for people who are, I want to say getting serious about a relationship, and that could be somebody who's even newly married, right? Like, not that
Yeah.
you're not serious about your relationship, but let's be real. Like, we all know that the honeymoon phase exists, and then you're settling with each other and all that. Maybe it's somebody you've been dating for, 6 months. You're like, oh man, could be the one type thing, whatever that is. What are some really important boxes that couples need to check with each other? Because I feel like there's just so much avoidance, especially nowadays, where people are very casual about relationships. Sometimes when you get into that really serious relationship, you don't check these boxes anymore. So what are some really important, whether it's, emotional or logistical conversations that couples that are, entering new phases of their relationship need to talk about when it comes to money?
Yeah. In the beginning, I just tell people to observe the
Okay.
person that they're dating and
I
how
like
they
that.
interact with money, how they talk about money. One of the questions I love to, when you're starting to like, oh, like this might really be serious or this is starting to get exclusive, you can say something like, how did your parents handle money when you were growing up? And do you
Mm.
agree with their approach? Because
Oh, that's a good question.
you'll learn a lot about them. And it's not really asking, like, what are you spending all your money on? What's your net worth? What's your credit score?
Right.
When you get engaged, or when you're at that point of being engaged, that's when you need to get financially naked.
Okay.
And you need to come together with your spouse and say, I'm going to show you all my things. You need to show me all your things. Let's pull our credit reports. Because you need to know.
I agree.
Because here's the thing,
100%.
when you marry someone, you and that person are now starting a business called Your Marriage Incorporated.
That's a great,
You
yep.
would you would never go into business with someone if you didn't know what their financial standing was.
Yes.
If you knew that you were both 50-50 on the line for this business, you wouldn't do that.
Right.
Why would you marry someone if you don't know? That's insane.
I totally agree. It's a great barometer, right? Because if you get to that point and one of the people in the relationship is resistant to that idea, then there's a big conversation that needs to be had about why. That's absolutely huge that you have that before you get into this business called marriage together, because it is a legally binding thing. This is why I tell people all the time, they're like, oh, Steven, you're old fashioned, because I say, don't ever buy a house with somebody unless you're married. Like, just don't. Because I've seen it too many times, unfortunately. Somebody very close to me, he had his life wrecked because she made a little bit more money than he did. But the big thing was she had the better credit score. We're coming full circle now. She had the better credit score. So what did they do? They moved into this house together. And I'm like, first off, I was like, if you don't want to they're like, well, we're not sure we want to get married. I said, you're already entering a massive legal agreement with each other through a mortgage. So I
Right.
was like, this isn't that much different. But, it's like, I just tell them, like, look, if she wants to buy the house and you just want to move in and pay rent, that's fine. Don't go in on it together, right? Long story short, the way that all the paperwork was drawn up and everything else does, she essentially owned the house. And, she was on all the documents because she had the better credit score. And they broke up. What happened? She kicked him out, and all the money he had equity in the house for was gone.
Gone. Yeah.
Because he had no legal rights to it based off of the way that everything was drawn up. If they were married, it wouldn't have mattered because, right, the way that most states are, you're going to split it 50-50. So it's like, it's one of those things to where I tell people, I'm like, there is no reason not to get financially naked with each other when you're getting very serious about stuff, because it's not just about the logistics of the money. It's about the emotions behind it and who we are as people. Because I like what you said with the question about asking how their parents handled money and then what they think about it. Because I always tell this story, a very short story of the two brothers. And there were these two brothers who had an alcoholic father. And the scientist was doing a survey on it. And one of the brothers that was an alcoholic and the other brother never drank. And he went to the brothers and he goes to the alcoholic brother and he said, hey, why are you an alcoholic? And he said, well, because my father was an alcoholic. And then he goes to the other brother and he says, hey, why aren't you an alcoholic? Why don't you drink at all? And he said, because my father was an alcoholic. So it's the exact same reason why, and it had totally different results. So just because it's the same with money, just because it's like, well, my dad was super frivolous with money. He was constantly spending, a gambler. That doesn't mean that that's going to translate to them. It absolutely can, but it can also have the entire opposite effect where they're like, I'm a money worrier because I saw the impact of what that had on my mom and our family. My dad would go out and blow all this money. We didn't have money for groceries. So it can swing the other way. So I absolutely love that question and encourage anybody, even if you've been married for a long time and you don't know. A lot of people I still know don't know these questions about their spouse. Why don't we ask these questions to our spouse?
I think schools need to teach proper communication and personal finance.
It would help.
Of course, I don't know. That might put me out of a job.
I think it'll be safe. We're pretty screwed up humans as it is. Think we're always going to have a need for people like you. We should be okay. Well, look, I know I've enjoyed the conversation so much. This has been an absolute blast. We'll have to do it again in the future, either your place or mine. But let me give you the last word here. If there was a message or something that you just wanted to share with everybody from this, whether, it's, just a guiding philosophy for you, or if it's something topical again, right now, what would you like to share?
So here's my parting words of wisdom. You might not be able to change your financial destination overnight, but you can change your financial direction in an instant. It's just up to you to decide and then start taking the steps, taking the action like we talked about.
There is something, going back to one of my favorite words, clarity. There's something to be said. Yes, you may be $50,000 in debt. No, you cannot change that overnight. But the confidence that you can gain, the assuredness that you can gain from just sitting down, looking at the numbers and putting together a plan versus just leaving that in the back of the recesses of your brain and constantly worrying about it. Oh, it's such a life change. And I love how you said that. It's like that can happen instantly. So awesome. Well, Christine, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and drop the mic on us multiple times, I feel, in this. This has been fantastic. And I really appreciate you and everything that you're doing.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me on.